I picked this guy because he'd been on Oprah. It's I literally didn't know. I was like, if you've been on Oprah, maybe you're legit. And he was not.
Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Today we have Dan, the founder and CEO of Koho, a fintech company that offers a free spending and savings account with standard features like cashback, as well as very unique features like a tool that helps you automatically improve your credit score every month. Koho is based in Toronto. They have about 200 employees and have raised over $130 million. The topic of today's episode is about performance coaching. So we'll talk about how and why really Dan decided to have a coach from day one, how it's helped him in his business, and how he scaled the coaching program at Koho to make it available to all 200 employees. Dan, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Happy to chat.
So let me start kind of at the beginning, right? And maybe just provide some context. Advisors and having advisors is pretty well known, well understood. I'd even say it's common. I mean, some startups don't really do it, but I would argue most founders know generally about the value of having advisors. And it's pretty clear, right? I mean, you need an expert in digital marketing, you find an advisor in digital marketing, and they help you with that topic. Coaching is something that's quite different. And I must admit, even myself, I'm not 100% sure, even what exactly a performance coach does and how and why you might leverage it. Who is that person on the other side? So I'm really looking into digging into this with you. When did your kind of coaching journey start? Like, when did you get your first coach? And just tell me that story about how you did it, why you even did it, when it was. I'm really curious to learn how it all started.
Yeah. So I guess my first coach was, I would probably say 7 or 8 years ago. And I didn't know where to start. I didn't know.
And this was, to be clear, before Koho? Like when exactly did Koho start?
Yeah, before Koho. Koho is about a little 5.5 years old or something.
Okay,
so,
got it.
So let's talk about just some underlying fundamental beliefs, I guess. And so one of them is like, Michael Phelps has a coach, right? Every elite athlete has a coach, whether you're an individual or team-based competitor. And so it made sense that there should be coaching in this world, which I think is a world of high performance. I think thing number two is, I'm a big believer in self-awareness, and I think a coach is one important lever, not a necessary level, but an important lever in self-awareness. I think self-awareness is like a coefficient for every interaction we have with people. And so it just feels like a worthwhile thing to invest in, whether that's coaching or therapy or any of that kind of stuff. My own journey to coaching was like based on that belief. And then I didn't really know where to start. I'd never had a coach, any of that kind of stuff. And I found some service and it paired me with a coach. And I picked this guy because he'd been on Oprah. It's I literally didn't know. I was like, if you've been on Oprah, maybe you're legit. And he was not. And so, but it literally started that manually for me. And kind of within a couple sessions, I could figure out that this probably wasn't a good fit for me. I think we can talk about this, but one of the things about coaching, and I think you're alluding to it, is it's like a super broad term, right? And there's a lot of loosey-goosey people out there who call themselves coaches, and like anybody can call themselves a coach, and it's a very different thing to have kind of a structured performance-based approach and accountability-based approach about kind of rigorously trying to get a little better every week.
And back then, and we'll dive into how you really use it now, right? Because I'm sure you've learned a lot. But back then, in your first coach, like, what really drove you to say, go from just thinking about it, saying, yeah, you know what, let's get a coach? What we're trying to accomplish?
What I was trying to accomplish was at the time, I probably would have been advising a startup. So my quick bio, co-founded a wind energy company, sold that, started another company, ran that for a while, ultimately didn't like it, and wound it down. And then at the time, I think I was helping a company in the United States raise money in the renewable energy space. And I think it was just a function of not a lot of sounding boards, I didn't really have a network. I didn't really have mentors. I didn't, know that many folks. And so I wanted to have kind of a forcing function, try and better understand the challenges that I was facing as an individual and as a professional. And so I think it was like pseudotherapy in some ways, but that was kind of the initial impetus anyway.
You found this person kind of because the signaling, right? Like they were on Oprah.
Yeah.
And they weren't good. Like, what does that mean? They weren't good. Like, what did he do? And we can then dive into what a good coach would do, right? But what were those first coaching sessions like?
So I think a big function of a coach is relatability, right? So my version of relatability requires somebody who has a relevant set of experiences that they can draw on that lets us kind of speak the same language. If coaching is a function of like both maybe professional decisions that you're grappling with and personal decisions as it relates to that world, you're missing a huge chunk of the puzzle if they have no understanding of what the professional world looks like for you. There was a lot of education involved, and frankly, a lot of like hand wavy nonsense kind of woo-woo terms around like energy and like,
right.
and just stuff that was not particularly actionable, not particularly tactical, and like, and that's just not really the way that I think or operate that well. So it felt like I just wasn't getting energy or clarity out of it that made me more effective.
Got it. So, you do a few sessions, not that helpful. I'm assuming you kind of fire him or let it go at some point. And then you look for your second coach right away. Do you take a break between then and when you kind of, or are you all in on coaching and it's just, okay, it's just, this is not the right person?
Yeah, because I think it wasn't binary, right? It's not zero value. It's just not the value that I was hoping to get, especially when you're funding this out of your pocket. And like most coaches overcharge. I think it's probably analogous to like dating, and we learn what we like and what we don't like, and where we have trust and where we don't have trust, and that's just part of like going through the process. And so, you take what's working about that, and it lets you be more explicit and clear in coach number 2. And then, I've probably worked with, if I was just going to count coaches, 5 different coaches now. So, each time I'm a little bit clear on what I want.
You put advisors and mentors and even mentors in a different bucket. And I just think about, you got like therapists, like pure just psychology. It's not about work, or it's about whatever you want it to be, right? You've got advisors who are very focused on, like I said, let's say a digital marketing advisor. You're only going to call them for that. And then you got this kind of gray line, you've got mentors, like that's getting pretty close to coaching. Like, how do you draw the line? Like, how do you think about one versus the other, and what makes a coach versus a mentor, let's say?
Yeah, look, it's certainly like a gradient, and they are blurry lines. I think a great therapist and a great coach are pretty similar in that, like, I think if a therapist only focuses on the internal components and the psychology, I think that's missing part of it. And I think if a coach only focuses on the external and the business functions, that's missing part of it. So like, they're interchangeable. I've worked with both. And then I think, so it's a gradient around like along kind of your own internal psychology through to your external. And then I think kind of the overlay to that too, right, is a versus a mentor or an advisor is like with a coach. If I'm talking to a mentor, in some ways I feel a little bit guilty about that because I feel like I'm trading on their time selfishly.
Right.
And there's not the same degree of accountability. But if I'm going to pay somebody $150 an hour, whatever the coaching rate is, for an hour a week, like, you better show up. They better show up. And there's a different kind of accountability in that relationship. And I can be more selfish in that relationship because I'm paying for it. You know what I mean? So the relationship is just a little bit clearer, and that creates better conversations.
Would you go as far as to say that a coach is like a professional mentor, or are there other things beyond just you pay for it and therefore they show up prepared?
I mean, I think it certainly can be a professional mentor. Probably coach number 4 that we worked with, we hired him because he had been the coach at Shopify and the first coach at Shopify from when they went from 60 to 3,000 people.
Right.
And so you obviously can draw on a wealth of experience from somebody like that. You know what I mean? I think the big thing about coaching is like you have to find the right environment of coaching that works for you. There's some direction there, but there's also a process of trial and error there for sure.
Like your first coach, you just didn't really know what you're doing. And so you went and got somebody, right? Like your second coach, was there a bit more of a process by that point, a bit more structure in terms of what you're looking for?
You learn much more from the stuff that doesn't work or rubs you the wrong way than the stuff that does, unfortunately. You could kind of reverse engineer into a better understanding of like what a great coach relationship would look like. And the next one I think was much more successful. His name was Staffen. He is in Vancouver. He ended up being the first kind of like on retainer coach at Koho for the whole team when we were 4 people. And, you know, I worked with him for probably 18 months. And the other thing is like coaches have a time horizon, you know what I mean? Like they have a certain philosophy about the world or a certain perspective. And, you know, my belief is you get to diminishing returns on that at some point. And
if you think about the analogy to a basketball coach, right? Well, a basketball coach tends to be probably like pretty, usually, not always, but a pretty good player. It doesn't need to be the best one, but they also have a bunch of other skills, right? And they have management skills, leadership skills. Like they get respected as a basketball player, right? When you think about, and here we're coaching specifically for startup founders, do these coaches need to have, do they have startup experience?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think the other thing is like I have much more proximity to mentors who have done things that I really admire professionally, and so that availability of like information is easier for me to draw on. But it really depends on the founder, right? How you think about EQ and all these different kind of things, that how beneficial a coach is. Like if I have a perfect understanding of my business world, I don't really need a coach to do that. Obviously I don't, but you know, it depends on kind of, there's just a needs basis to it. So, and there's a huge sort of intangible, mushy stuff around, do you trust the person? Do you actually have chemistry with them? Like, you know, you want to have hard conversations about all the shit that's scaring you or anything like that. Right. And so there's just a relationship dynamic component for sure too.
You're meeting this person once a week, really, really early days of Koho. What are you doing in each session? Like, how are they structured? What do you tend to talk about? Who comes up with the agenda?
The best ones in my experience are one of collaboration in terms of like, obviously I have to bring my own perspective or the things that are weighing on me. Within that, I think that there should be a super formulaic approach insofar as like accountability with like clear action items, clear takeaways, especially when you're the founder. It's a pretty blurry line between like the issues that you're dealing with the business and your personal life and your personal well-being in a lot of senses, you know, at least the way I operate. Wiser people than me would probably be able to create more boundaries there, but it's very difficult to like completely isolate a thread between a business issue and a personal issue. And so a good coach will provide a mirror to understand, if I'm thinking about this business issue, what are my trends and tendencies and things that I am working on a personal level or a business level, to kind of just be a thought partner as I'm thinking about those decisions.
But I'm wondering if there's a story that's not all that sensitive, whether it's recent or old, doesn't really matter. You can share, like, I came to the coach with, you know, this type of problem, and then this is the kind of plan that we discussed, and then this is what happened, you know, as a result.
This one's probably a couple years ago. We were talking about how functional our leadership team is. The way that I think about a leadership team is there is, you know, N+1 relationships on. So right now our leadership team across all departments is 13 people. That means that I have 12 different relationships times 12 people on the team. There's like 140 relationships on this team. This was a couple years ago. Leadership team was smaller and all that kind of stuff. We were doing this work as a leadership team around how to build and improve trust and all those kinds of things. You know, the results came back like mixed. You know, some people felt like we had the right posture around trust and communication and candor and all those things, and other people didn't. That's always kind of the case. But what I did do with my coach in that situation was like diagnose the issue and come up with a playbook. And part of that conversation is, I think as a founder, when you feel like things aren't good within your team, you inevitably take that personally and you feel like it's your failure, right? And so there's an element of like, hang on, put that ego stuff aside. We don't know if this is about you yet or not. Like, this is an anonymous survey within your team.
And that's what they're saying. Like, that's what the coach is helping you.
Yeah, exactly. So this is would be an example of the dialogue I'd have with the coach. And then within that, you know, taking the personal kind of, let's call it blind spots off. And then now coming up with a playbook and being like, well, how do we diagnose the issue? Yeah,
that's helpful. And, you know, it does strike me like some people will say, like, when you think about therapy, right? Like, a lot of people say, why would you talk to a therapist? You just, you know, if you could just talk to a friend, right? And the reality is there's something about the third partiness, the objectivity, and the fact that you're paying them, right? That just makes that dialogue so different. I mean, a friend has self-interests, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just like they're there as your friend. And so they're going to deal with it in a certain way. A therapist is very objective. Like, their only goal is you, right? And so I'm just wondering how much of that is similar in coaching, where it's like you get to be so much more objective.
Yeah, I think people kind of have some bad intuitions around therapy and coaching insofar as like look, your friend is your friend. That is a very cluttered relationship in terms of like how honest they're going to be and why they're going to be honest and their consequences for being honest. And it's obviously deeply informed by their view of the world. If you think about the unlock for getting it right, right? And let's just say you, as a result of therapy or coaching or whatever, you get 2% better at your decision making or 2% better at like stopping and taking a breath or better understanding yourself. And then that compounds over years and a career. It's kind of a no-brainer in that regard.
I'm just wondering, you've done it, right? And obviously you found value in it. That's why you've kept it. But how critical do you think it has been to you and Koho in general, especially in those early days, like, scale of 0 to 1 to 10? How important is coaching in those early days?
It's kind of math, right? Let's say you're working 50 hours a week as a founder, maybe more, maybe less, whatever. If you're going to spend an hour a week or an hour every 2 weeks, which is totally fine, that breaks down to 30 minutes a week on a 50-hour week, right? Or let's just call it an hour a week and say you're super aggressive on coaching. That's 2% of your time a week. And if that helps you make one better decision that week as a founder, then it's probably going to accelerate the company more than 2% that week. But when I'm doing the math for the team at Koho and the ROI, sometimes it's difficult to quantify. But the way that I think about it is right now, the ratio of employees to coaching utilization is about 40 to 1, and about half of Koho Koho team uses a coach. So we're at, 2.5 coaches right now. But let's call it 40 to 1 on those people. So that's 2.5% of employee to coach ratio. Are those people going to stay at Koho 2.5% longer? Are they going to be 2.5% more effective? Probably, I think they're probably going to be 10% more effective.
Is there any kind of conflict or tension between managers and coaches, right? I think about a manager's leadership part of the role, and there is obviously, we were talking about this before, right? A manager's goal is not just to coach you, right? They've got a bunch of other objectives, but there is a coaching element to management. And so how do you guys think about that? Is there even a tension there? And, when does an employee say, I'm going to go to this with my coach, but I'm going to, go to this with my manager and so on?
But I think the tension comes from that. That's like a really high trust thing. People are having conversations with the coach at Koho being like, I don't want to know if I want to stay here, and that's like a hard conversation to have. But it's also a super useful conversation to have, and people should be having that conversation with their manager and be super open about it. And, using a tour of duty model or whatever. But I think that what coaching facilitates is it almost acts like a lubricant in the company around conversations that can and should be happening.
Coaching, it's not a new concept. I think it's gone a lot more popular, but especially if you think about the analogies in sports and all these other places, like very few people have a coach, very few companies have coaching, at least startups. Do you have any insight as to like why that might be?
I think that there's a bunch of quack life coaches out there. And I think that that's like repellent to a lot of people who are outcomes driven, and there's definitely a lot of noise to sift through. I think this is changing, but I think there was a stigma around coaching and more specifically therapy, and I think coaching kind of obviously is adjacent to that world, which I think is changing. And I think you touched on another part, which is like, hey man, we're all busy, it's hard to carve out the time, and it feels like indulgent. And
so what's your tips to a founder, first time founder, early stage, and they're gonna do this coaching thing? Where do they go, and how do they find a way to get a good coach?
I think there's a couple things. I think one of them is just expectation management. You're not going to get your perfect coach in day one, especially if you're paying like $150 an hour. I think a really good proxy question, or like the proxy conviction that you need to come to, is that they know what elite performance looks like and that you have good chemistry with them.
Okay, got it. So in a sense, it's similar to any other, like you want to learn, you want physio, whatever, like you want yoga, go to a platform, find people, look at reviews, and then try them out and spend some money. And
yeah, man, MVP it,
That's
like
right.
Spend 15 minutes talking to 50 coaches or 10 coaches or whatever. Lots of them will do free consultations or intro calls or whatever. And you can spend 15 or 30 minutes and ask them, hey, what should I be looking for in a coach? It's a great question.
What about turnover? I'm curious, like, do you have a similar stat on turnover of people that take coaches and people that don't?
I don't know it offhand. I do know that I push the coaches regularly to be like, if people feel like they're not thriving at Koho, that it is their job, they are performance coaches, and it's their job to coach people out of Koho. and say, like, destigmatize the relationship and say, hey, this might not be the right place for you. And like, let's figure out how to, what an exit plan looks like or something like that. So, but I don't know the stats, but I do know that that's a consistent push. Attrition is way too stigmatized and it shouldn't be. And we have healthy attrition. It's like 10% a year, but, coaching is part of that. Maybe I'll leave you with a few kind of the other ROIs that we think about that I wasn't necessarily expecting. So we've talked about the math of like how this works from a 40-to-1 basis, right? I think it's a big asset from a recruiting perspective in terms of people having coaching. I think it's like the right thing to do if you can help people have more career self-awareness or personal self-awareness. Like that seems like a good thing to invest in just personally. And then one of the things that I wasn't expecting is, and the coaches have to be mindful of this, I can like download cultural context on these coaches and they're going to have 20 or 30 one-on-ones a week and they can beat that drum around what performance looks like at Koho, right? In ways that I necessarily can't in a one-on-one environment. Our coach might be like, hey, a lot of people feel like we're slipping on transparency. Like I've heard this a lot. And so you get to kind of have a bit of a thematic window into your company, which is useful.
And actually, on that note, because it's almost like you're getting a lot of the, there's these tools, and the name just escapes me, but they ping a lot of these survey tools, right? And they'll ping everybody in the org, and they'll do a survey on how different things. Are you kind of using that plus the coaches to get this kind of quant and qualitative, deeper insights into what's going on? Because that'll tell you, whatever, trust is down, but it won't tell you any whys, right? And so the coaching, I would assume, does.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you have to be careful to not over-rotate on anything that's anecdotal. It's just something that comes with scaling a company. But so I think we use 15.5, which is our like engagement tool, and looks at 80 different parameters across the company with different surveys and stuff. And then you can map that to coaching, and you can also map like things like likelihood of performance and likelihood of retention and all these different things with people who have coached. Like something like 70% of the people who got promotions have worked with our coaches at Koho. So there's like, clear ROIs in that kind of stuff. And whether that's cause or correlation is unclear. But
sure.
Anyway, there's like interesting data sets that you get out of it.
Awesome. Well, look, Dan, this has been a great episode. Quick recap. You've been using performance coaching for 7-8 years now, certainly since day zero at Koho, and it's made a considerable impact to your performance, to the other founders' performance, and to employees, to the point that you've scaled it now, and coaching is available to all employees at Koho, which I find is very unique, certainly for a startup, and I'm sure very appreciated by everybody that works there. So thanks a lot, Dan, for sharing that story. I'm sure it'll be very helpful to a lot of founders out there. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to see more content, check out pmf.show.